My name is Isabella Montero. This story happened to me 2 years ago, and to this day, I avoid going to that same place. It was a Friday night, and I was coming back from a friend's house. I took an empty bus and got off a few blocks before my house because I wanted to buy something at a convenience store. At that hour, the streets were deserted. The icy wind made the streetlights flicker, and the few cars that passed seemed not to notice my presence. After buying what I needed, I walked to the nearest bus stop, where I would wait for the second bus that would take me straight home. I stood there, alone, messing with my cell phone to try and ignore the silence around me, until I felt something strange. It was a presence, something subtle at first, but that soon became suffocating. Then I heard footsteps, slow, measured, coming in my direction. I swallowed hard, but didn't turn around immediately. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my chest. Suddenly the footsteps stopped. The tension in the air was unbearable. "Are you alone?" The voice was low, hoarse, right behind me. My muscles stiffened. Fear ran down my spine. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Slowly I turned just enough to see out of the corner of my eye. There was a man standing there. Tall, thin, wearing a crumpled dark suit. But the worst thing was his eyes, deep-set and lifeless, as if he wasn't really there. And then I realized something even more terrifying. His feet weren't touching the ground. I don't know how to explain what I felt. It was a paralyzing dread, as if my body was telling me that I shouldn't be there. I quickly looked away, turning back to face the street, but he was still there. I could feel his presence, as if he was leaning close to my ear. "Are you alone?" he repeated, now closer. My heart raced. My eyes began to water from so much fear. I pretended I didn't hear him and stood up slowly. I walked without looking back. With every step I took, I felt his shadow moving along with me. As soon as I reached the corner illuminated by a lamppost, I ran as fast as I could to my house. I locked myself in my room, trembling from head to toe. The next morning I tried to convince myself that it had all been a product of exhaustion, a suggestion of my own mind. Until, days later, I overheard a conversation at the market near my house. A lady was talking quietly about a man who haunted that bus stop. They said that years ago, an executive had been run over there by a bus that didn't even stop. He lay dying alone on the asphalt with no one to help him, and ever since then, his spirit asks everyone who passes by the bus stop if they are alone. I don't know if it was him, but I never went to that place again. When my Aunt Estella died, my family seemed completely devastated. I, however, barely remembered her. They said I met her when I was very little, but I didn't have any memories of her. Because of the funeral, I was sent to spend the night at the maternal grandmother's house of my cousins, whom I had never met. Everyone called her Grandma Lena. She was a short and stern-looking lady, but she welcomed me warmly and insisted that I call her Grandma too. Her house was old, made of wood, and creaked with every step, but it was huge, like those horror movie houses, with dark corridors full of closed doors. I spent the afternoon playing with my cousins, running through the rooms and hiding in the dimly lit corners of the house. But when night fell, something started to bother me. The oldest of my cousins, Rodrigo, pulled me aside before going to sleep and whispered, "If you hear anything under the bed, don't answer." I raised my eyebrows. "What?" "Just don't answer." I laughed, thinking it was a stupid joke to scare me, but he didn't laugh back. I didn't care. I had done this kind of prank with friends before, so I lay down and tried to sleep. But in the middle of the night, I woke up hearing someone calling me. It was a whisper. "Samuel." My blood ran cold. I blinked a few times, confused, and the silence returned. I should have ignored it. I should have turned over and pretended nothing happened. But a few minutes later, the voice returned. "Samuel, it's me." My heart almost stopped. I knew that voice. It was my mum who had died 3 years ago. I felt a chill down my spine and sat up in bed. My eyes filled with tears instantly. It couldn't be real. I was dreaming. I had to be. Samuel, forgive me. I swallowed hard. My throat was tight. I wanted to answer. I wanted to ask if it was really her, but something held me back. Rodrigo's warning echoed in my head. If you hear anything under the bed, don't answer. And then came the worst. A hand came out of the shadows under the bed and grabbed my wrist. Dry skin, cold, hard as stone. I squeezed my eyes shut, trembling with dread. And then the voice changed. It was no longer my mom's voice. It was rough, distorted, full of resentment. You wished for my death. My eyes widened. I had never told that to anyone. But yes, when my mother got sick, when I had to drop everything to take care of her alone, there were moments when I wished it would all end, that she would stop suffering, that I would stop suffering. But how did that thing know that? The hand squeezed harder, pulling me down. Forgive me, Samuel, forgive me. I closed my eyes and tried to release my arm, but that thing wouldn't let me go. The rotting smell filled my nostrils. Fear completely overwhelmed me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Finally, with all the strength I had, I pulled my hand away and moved back until I leaned against the wall. Silence fell in the room. The hand disappeared back into the darkness. I stayed there, motionless, until the sun began to rise through the window. The next morning I told Grandma Lena everything. She looked at me with a blank expression, as if she already expected it. After a long silence, she just said, "You talked to her, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but since that night, I never slept in a room with an open space under the bed again. My name is Rachel, and I grew up in a small suburb in Indiana. I always heard stories about ghosts and supernatural occurrences, but I never paid much attention. My grandmother talked about spirits that roamed at night. My mother said certain things shouldn't be questioned, but me, I just wanted to live my life without thinking about that nonsense. Until one thing happened. In 2021, after the pandemic tightened my family's financial situation, I had to find a job. I got a night shift at a 24-hour convenience store, the kind that are at gas stations. It was a lonely and tiring job, but the money was worth it. The manager, on the other hand, was a jerk. He always put me on the worst shifts, complained about everything, and said I should stop whining and work. And that's how, on any given night, my co-worker Lisa and I were responsible for organizing the merchandise near the cold room. While we were stacking the boxes, Lisa suddenly stopped and widened her eyes. "Rachel, did you see that? The jackets moved on their own." I rolled my eyes. "Lisa, seriously, it's enough that I have to work here. You don't need to invent a ghost to make it worse." She insisted that she saw something moving between the coats hanging near the freezer, but I ignored it. I didn't want to know. That was a mistake. The following week, the manager put me on the graveyard shift. The store was next to a college bar, so I already expected to deal with drunks and troublemakers. Around 2:30 in the morning, an absurd storm started. The wind shook the windows. The thunder made the building tremble. Suddenly, the lights went out. The emergency generator turned on, but it was still a strange atmosphere, with the lights flickering and an eerie silence between the thunderclaps. That's when an elderly woman, a frequent customer, approached me. "Be careful, dear." "Careful with what?" I asked, half distracted. "With the girl." My spine went cold. "What girl?" She looked to the back of the hallway where the freezers were. "They say a girl died around here, run over years ago, and that she never left." She gave me a serious look, as if she was sure of what she was saying, and left. I pretended I didn't care, but my stomach churned right away. 2 weeks later, on a quiet afternoon shift, Lisa asked me to restock the refrigerators. I took the drink cart and went to the cold room. As soon as I pushed the door open to enter, I saw small, pale fingers holding the side of the door. My heart stopped. For a second, I thought Lisa was joking, but then I looked ahead and saw her at the register serving customers. I was alone there. A chill ran up my neck. Calm down, Rachel. You're tired. You're seeing things. But then, when I tried to open the door, something pushed it back against me. Someone or something was holding it from the other side. I turned around and looked through the glass of the refrigerator. Lisa was still up front, not noticing anything. I was trapped. That horrible feeling of being watched took over me. The smell of the place seemed different. Rust, wet earth. Trembling, I picked up my cell phone and called my friend Megan just to hear a familiar voice. But when she answered, I heard a baby crying. "Rachel, stop being a jerk," Megan growled. "You know my nephew is in the hospital. This isn't funny." "Megan, it's not me." The phone went silent. The refrigerator door opened on its own, and I ran out of there as fast as I could. After that day, I never went into the cold room alone again, but the fear wouldn't leave me. Then I remembered what the lady from the storm had said. I remembered the girl. The next day, I went back to the store alone in the middle of the night. I took a small bag of candy and left it at the end of the hall. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." I whispered those words in the dark. Since then, I've never seen anything strange in the store again, but I've also never been alone there again. My grandmother told me this story just months before she passed away. She was already very ill, and we knew she didn't have much time. So, before she left, I made sure to ask her for every detail of this story. My grandmother was born and raised in a village in rural Mississippi, one of those small towns where everyone knows each other and ghost stories are part of everyday life. She told me about her own grandmother, a cold woman who never liked her. From a young age, my grandmother was treated like a servant in the house. Her mother died early, and it was up to her to take care of the household chores. But this woman, instead of helping, mistreated her. She said the house always had a strange energy, as if something bad was trapped there. The years passed, and that woman got sick, bedridden, wasting away little by little. On the day she was going to die, she asked to speak to my grandmother. She didn't want to go into the room. She was afraid. She said the air around that woman was heavy, as if something invisible was pulling at her. But she was forced to go. The woman, with a weak voice, asked for forgiveness. "Forgive me for everything." My grandmother, even trembling, said that she forgave her, that she should go in peace, that she should seek God. But the woman smiled in a strange way. "God," she whispered, "I'm not going there, I'm going anywhere." But there, she died that afternoon. That night, while the family waited for the funeral service to arrive, an icy wind began to blow. My grandmother was in the kitchen when she heard a strange sound from outside. A lament, something distant, coming from the darkness of the fields around. "It's just my imagination," she thought. But when she looked outside, the trees seemed to move in a strange way, as if something invisible was circling among them. The next morning, while preparing for the wake, my grandmother and her cousins were playing in the yard. Near the house was an old oak tree where the deceased used to sit. Without thinking, they ran towards it, and then they stopped dead in their tracks. My grandmother was there, sitting on the wooden bench with empty, lifeless eyes. But my grandmother was still inside the house, in the coffin. Her cousins saw it too. They ran away, terrified, with their hearts beating wildly. That wasn't possible. The funeral took place the next day. They had the mass, the burial, and everything seemed settled. But the next morning, someone arrived with a frightening piece of news. The coffin was open, the body outside. They went to the cemetery and saw that the woman's arms were outstretched, and the rosary that they had placed between her hands was now inside the coffin alone. They put the body back and repeated the burial. The next morning, it happened again. This time, they decided to spend the night at the cemetery, on watch. But they didn't hear anything, they didn't see anyone, and yet, at dawn, The body was once again out of the grave, and this time it was starting to rot. The priest was called. He looked at the body and said, "She rejects the holy ground." It was then that the family made a desperate decision. They removed the body from the cemetery and buried it outside, away from the consecrated ground. And for the first time, it stayed where it was. No one ever saw her figure haunting the house again. No other apparitions were reported, but her lonely tomb is still there, set apart from all the other dead. A sinister reminder that not everyone can find rest. This happened in November 2011, when I was still a medical intern at a university hospital in the state of Texas. That night, I was assigned to the obstetrics and gynecology ward. It was a long shift, and after midnight, I was alone at the nursing station reviewing medical records. I remember the time exactly because that's when the staff usually left to eat in the hospital cafeteria. The charge nurse told me that she was going out and that upon her return, she would administer the pending medications. I stayed there alone with the noise of the air conditioning and the occasional distant sound of footsteps in the empty hallways. I took the opportunity to visit a patient who needed a new dose of medication. I asked her some routine questions, and when I finished, I told her, "The nurse will be here soon to give you the medicine." Her answer chilled me to the bone. But she already came. Frozen, I tried to stay calm. "Are you sure?" "Yes, doctor. You must have crossed paths with her in the hallway before entering." I knew that was impossible. I was completely alone in that ward. My voice faltered, but still I asked, "Well, what was she wearing?" The patient answered without hesitation. White dress, white socks, white high-heeled shoes, just like the old nurses." My heart raced. The nurses at that hospital hadn't worn white dresses for decades. The uniform now was surgical scrubs with a blue sweater. There was no nurse with that description in the hospital. I tried to maintain my composure and left the room with trembling legs. When the charge nurse returned from her meal, I asked casually, "Have you already given the patient in room 304 her medication?" She frowned. "No, I was going to do that now." I swallowed hard. Then I told her what the patient had told me. Her expression turned pale instantly. Without saying anything, she grabbed the equipment and went to check. When she came back, she stared at me and said, "She repeated the same thing. She said another nurse had already given her the medicine." Except there was no other nurse there. To this day, I think about it. Older doctors and nurses at the hospital always talked about mysterious figures in the hallways. Some believed it was just fatigue, hallucinations caused by the stress of endless shifts. But some say that in every hospital, there is always someone who never left. I don't know who administered that medication that night. And honestly, I prefer never to find out.